Si os digo fotografía de calle, ¿en quién pensáis? ¿Quién sería el autor o autora referente en esto de la street photography? Venga, os dejo unos segundos para que penséis. ¿Ya? ¿Sí? Ese en el que estáis pensando. Hoy en Fotolari tenemos nada más y nada menos que a Alex Webb. Ha venido a Barcelona para dar una charla en Fotoforum y además hoy ha organizado aquí un taller de fotografía en foto colectánea. Así que nos hemos venido a colarnos en el taller a ver si aprendemos algo, que no nos va a venir mal, para charlar un rato con él y yo creo que hasta me voy a animar a enseñarle alguna foto. De hecho, yo tengo una que en mi cabeza al menos siempre me ha parecido muy Alex Webb. Vamos a ver qué opina él. Pues aquí estamos con Alex Webb, ¿cómo os quedáis? Vaya nivel en Fotolari, un lujo tenerle aquí. Has viajado a muchos lugares del mundo, has conocido medio mundo, has fotografiado muchas ciudades, has estado en Barcelona, creo que en el año 92. ¿Crees que es Barcelona una ciudad fotogénica? ¿Crees que hay ciudades que son, o lugares que son más fotogénicos y donde es más fácil hacer fotos bonitas, fotos resultonas?
I think it isn't so much places being photogenic. It's really more that at certain points in my life, I've been intrigued by certain cultures. So, early on, I became intrigued by Haitian culture and Mexican culture. And those were two really important countries for me to explore. They are both places where there is a strong sense of vibrant street life, very different, say, than some other parts of the world. But it's not so much that it's photogenic, it's that there's some feel about the culture that particularly intrigues me.
Empezaste trabajando en medios tradicionales, en medios de fotoperiodismo, podemos decir, y has acabado convertido en un auténtico referente de la fotografía de calle. ¿Cuál es la diferencia, cuál es la frontera, si es que la hay, entre la fotografía de calle y la fotografía documental? ¿O son un poco lo mismo?
I think that documentary sort of includes a number of other traditions. I would say that street photography is a kind of documentary. I would say that photojournalism is also a kind of documentary, but they strike different notes. So for me, what's really special about what I call street photography, and it's not everyone's definition, is this sense of when you walk out the door, you're not walking out there with any kind of preconception. You are simply exploring on the basis of curiosity. And you find what you find. You're not going out there with any kind of agenda. I think that, say, certain kinds of photojournalists go somewhere because they expect to find something. So, they go to X place because they think that it may develop into civil war or something like that. Street photographer goes and just explores and follows the rhythms of the street and their own personal passions to find what they find. Sometimes the photographs may look quite similar, but they come from a different place at the beginning.
Pero es verdad que en algunos casos, algunos de tus trabajos, sí que has estado en lugares noticiables, o sea, donde digamos que podían ocurrir informaciones relacionadas con la actualidad. Estoy pensando, por ejemplo, en los trabajos en la frontera de México y Estados Unidos. En esos casos también no hay una agenda, no sales a buscar algo concreto, sales a observar y ver qué pasa, o ahí sí que vas buscando algo más vinculado a esa idea del fotoperiodismo.
Well, I think I'm interested in the life in the streets, but I am also interested in certain kinds of socio-political situations. So I think in some ways, what I do is I sort of sometimes work as a photojournalist, but it enables me to get into situations where I perform actually more like a street photographer. So, there's the photojournalism is kind of an entree into the world, but the way I explore it is much more the way a street photographer works. That's not to say that there aren't situations where I may work more like a photojournalist, quote unquote. But generally speaking, I'm always looking for that other kind of picture, something that's a little different, some kind of discovery that's not what other photographers are finding in those situations.
La fotografía de calle es una forma de retratar la sociedad. ¿De algún modo pretende mejorar con ese retrato la sociedad? Es decir, podemos usar el mismo discurso que algunos fotoperiodistas de hago este trabajo para denunciar una situación, para mostrar esta situación e intentar mejorarla, o es una visión más neutra de os enseño esto y ya está, yo soy un observador?
Well, from my own perspective, I mean, you know, I feel that, say, for instance, my work in Haiti, if someone looks at it, gets a different kind of understanding of the country of Haiti than not. So I do see contributing in some way to understanding. But to say that it's bettering things is more complicated because I think that it's very uncertain as to how photographs really interact with the world as a whole. There certainly have been situations where a photograph has done good things. I mean, we think of the My Lai massacre photographs, for instance, in Vietnam, or the Abu Ghraib photograph, you know, where something was revealed by a photograph that did transform people's attitude. But it's not always that case. I think that there are probably racists in the world who see pictures of starving Africans and they say, oh, well, that's what Africans do to themselves, you know? So I think, you know, photographs have a very complicated relationship with society as a whole. So I really don't think I can predict what people will perceive in my photographs. And more than anything else, I hope that my photographs sort of ask questions about the nature of the world. They don't try and define things. They ask questions about how can that and how can that and how can that coexist. But in that sense, I think that, or I hope that I'm expanding people's understanding of things by saying, you know, well, the world is a complicated place and we should embrace its complications and not try and put it into sort of little knowledgeable nuggets because it's not that. We don't really know.
He leído en alguna entrevista que has comentado que como hacer foto de calle es salir a observar, pasear con la cámara, el 99% de las fotos son un fallo, son un error. ¿Cómo sabes que estás ante una imagen que es el 1%? ¿Cómo sabes que esa imagen es la buena y las otras 99 no?
Look, there's no specific criteria that one can you know, point to as to why a photograph is successful or it's not successful. Viewing photographs is a subjective matter, but I do think that, you know, certain photographs seem to rise to the surface that somehow have some kind of quality that is special, that is unique, that take the viewer somewhere where they haven't been before. And for me, that's what's really exciting, is when something out there happens, particularly something unexpected, that somehow these elements come together and there's something about the visual quality and the emotional quality of the image that somehow strikes one as surprising, different, enlightening in some way or another. But I can't define what that is. It's only when I see it. But maybe that's the point. If you could define it in words, you wouldn't have to take the photograph.
Has comentado antes en el taller, me ha gustado mucho la comparación, que hay fotógrafos de calle que bailan, me ha gustado mucho la expresión, que bailan en la calle, que bailan en la escena, que pasan casi desapercibidos, y otros que se pegan a la escena, ¿no? Has hablado de Bruce Gilden, ¿no? Que se pega muchísimo a la escena. ¿En qué categoría estarías tú? O igual hay otra categoría que define mejor tu forma de trabajar en la calle.
You know, I would say that to some extent I dance. I'm not an elegant dancer, but I dance some. No, I try and approach situations as unobtrusively as possible. You know, I approach quietly. I try and work quietly. I don't make an event of my presence. That said, there are times when somehow a more significant confrontation seems appropriate or seems right. I mean, there's a picture of mine from Grenada, for example, in a bar of a man, and there's red and yellow and green behind him, and there's a very intense confrontation with me. And that was important. It was very palpable, that confrontation. On the other hand, I approached him very quietly. I sort of crept up very quietly and put the camera up to my eye and took a couple frames, and we nodded at each other, and I left. So it's not as if I rushed up to him and slammed the camera at his face. I think it also depends a lot on the situation. There are situations where there's a lot of activity and, where maybe it is more justified for me to sort of push my way in, and others where I want to be much more distanced.
Creo que fue en 2012 publicaste el libro The Memory City, hecho en Rochester y hecho coincidiendo con la caída de Kodak como icono de la imagen. ¿Echas de menos Kodachrome? Muy vinculado siempre esa película a los colores de muchas de tus fotos más reconocibles.
Certainly when Kodachrome was finally discontinued, and of course for several years, there were rumors, it's going to end, it's going to end, it's going to end. And I was always like, oh no. Sure, I missed it initially. I felt like, a major part of my visual vocabulary is suddenly taken away. I've learned since to work digitally, and there are things I do like about working digitally. It does open up possibilities in terms of working in low light that I never had before with Kodachrome. I mean, I remember trying to handhold, the camera in low light in Kodachrome and being unsuccessful a lot of the time. I think the two mediums are different. Kodachrome is different than digital, but digital is an interesting medium too. And, I now feel that I'm beginning to get a kind of quality in digital that I do like. What I find with digital is that I'm able to work successfully in a greater variety of kinds of situations than I was with Kodachrome. Kodachrome was a very unique and special film for certain kinds of things. Late afternoon light, Kodachrome 64 was just remarkable. Certain kinds of crummy light, sort of fluorescent mixed light, was very interesting with Kodachrome 200. But digital, I found that I can work over a greater variety of different situations and produce good pictures in those situations more consistently. The one thing, though, that is always true is that the really special pictures are always just as rare, whether it's Kodachrome, whether it's digital. The world only gives you, 3 or 4 pictures a year, really serious pictures. I mean, good pictures, sure, but really good ones. So it's always that way.
¿Llevas siempre cámara encima? Y si es así, ¿cuál te has traído a este viaje? ¿Cuál llevas ahora encima?
I have a camera with me here in Barcelona, but I'm not working consistently with it. It's at the hotel now. I may go out occasionally over the next couple of days and photograph. When I was younger, I felt I had to have my camera all the time. I was like, I'm those moments, I've got to get them, they'll pass by and so forth. Now I really get into a place where, okay, this is my photographing time, and that's when I work seriously. I have used Leica rangefinders for years and years, since 1967 or 1968. I now use a digital Leica rangefinder.
¿Y el móvil es también una herramienta? No sé si tú usas puntualmente el teléfono como cámara. Y en todo caso, la cámara que estés usando, sea una cámara, una Leica, un móvil, ¿condiciona la forma de trabajar y en cierto modo también el resultado, el tipo de imagen que vas a conseguir con una u otra cámara?
I use a phone in my own, life as, making notes occasionally about things. I don't use it seriously as a camera. It's true, I have done a couple assignments. I was specifically asked by phone manufacturers to use their phone, which I did, and I tried to make it work for me as much as I could. But in terms of my own work, no, I don't use the phone as a tool in that sense.
Independientemente de si es una cámara, un teléfono, si es formato medio, porque creo que has usado también algunas cosas de Fujifilm, de GFX, esa cámara que estás usando hace que las fotos que dan como resultado sean diferentes, o es un elemento totalmente ajeno al resultado?
Look, I think it's basically, photography is about the eye and about seeing. That said, sure, certain cameras have limitations. You can do certain kinds of work with certain kinds of cameras. So I find that the Leica rangefinder is a particularly good tool for working in the street. It's small, it's unobtrusive, and because you're because it's a rangefinder, you see the world totally in focus all the time. So you're not worrying about, say if it was a single lens reflex, oh, that looks like it's out of focus. Oh, but I know that with my depth of field, it will be in focus. You don't have to, those issues aren't there. You see everything in focus. If you know your depth of field, you know that's going to be in focus. You know, that said, for a recent project that Rebecca and I did, Waves, I decided to use a medium format panoramic camera because there was something about the feel of the seascape that felt like it needed the panoramic format. And on top of that, I felt that with taking pictures, you know, those kinds of photographs, which weren't dependent on, you know, complexity and moments and so forth, that I would like to have a larger file so I could make larger prints and have greater definition. So sure, tools are, you know, incredibly important, what tool you choose. But I don't see it any different than, you know, a painter choosing, oh, they're using a very fine paintbrush here to do these little details, but they're using a larger paint here to put a slath of paint on it. So I just see it as cameras are tools, and you use them as you see fit.
Hay dos adjetivos que se suelen usar para definir tus fotos, que es coloridas y complejas. Y realmente son muy complejas porque, si te fijas, están ocurriendo muchísimas cosas en diferentes planos. Al hacer la foto, ¿eres consciente? ¿Ves todo lo que está pasando en la escena? ¿O alguna vez te ha pasado que al revisarla, de repente ves un elemento que está en el fondo y que está pasando algo que tú no habías visto?
Well, every situation is different. And so there are situations that I have wandered into where everything is there, you know, and the photograph comes within a few seconds. There are other situations where I go down the street and there's something about the feel of this particular corner. I smell the possibility of a picture, but it's not quite there yet. And maybe I hang out a little bit, or maybe I walk down the block and then I come back and hope it's there, and so forth. But, you know, I think most of the time, the most exciting and successful photographs for me are ones that are, something happens that's unexpected. You know, I'm hanging out and waiting, and some part of me thinks, oh, if someone walks in the corner of the frame, that'll make the picture. But someone doesn't. Something else happens over here, and that turns out to be the photograph. So, and certainly there are times when I find things in the photograph after I, you know, look at them, you know. But I usually, these days, I usually have a little sense that at least there was a possibility of a photograph, but you don't really know until you look at it more carefully afterwards.
Siempre os metéis mucho con mis fotos y he dicho, tengo que aprovechar esta ocasión, que tengo a Alex Webb delante. Yo hago fotos muy reguleras, algunas salen alguna foto buena, pero tengo una foto que a mí siempre me ha parecido que tiene un estilo Alex Webb. Y digo, bueno, voy a preguntárselo. Te voy a enseñar una foto y necesito tu opinión sincera. Pero sincera, si es Webb, Alex Webb approved or a shit.
Okay.
What do you think?
I think it's an okay photograph. I don't think it's a great photograph. It doesn't look much like something I would take, I don't think. Yeah, I mean, I like the way the yellow pops out against the gray of the buildings, and I think it's a nice moment with the child. But it's not a photograph that, you know, I find deeply compelling. It's a perfectly good photograph, but okay.
Okay. Well, not bad. So thank you very much for the time.
Okay.
It's a pleasure to have you here in Barcelona.
Okay.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Gracias.